In popular culture, there are generally two ways that evil is portrayed. On the one hand, evil can be presented as a faceless, disembodied power that floats all around us. Think about the dark side of the Force in Star Wars. It's out there, it mysteriously draws people in, but it doesn't have any shape or form. Even though there are people who are entirely sold out to the dark side, there is no Satan or demons or evil spirits behind it. And the people like Darth Vader, aka Anakin Skywalker, is not by nature evil. At any moment he can choose to resist the dark side and go back to being good. On the other hand, evil is often portrayed as something that is personified. This is to say, it's not just a force that's out there trying to draw us in. Rather, there's a spiritual being who is by nature evil. For him, there's no choice. There's no going back. Evil is what this person is, and his very existence threatens our well-being. In Western pop culture, I think one of the classic examples of this kind of evil is Bram Stoker's Dracula. The question we want to consider today is this: which expression of evil is best reflected in the teachings of Jesus? When Jesus taught his followers to pray for deliverance from evil, was he thinking of evil as a faceless power in the world, a disembodied dark force? Or was he thinking of evil as personified in a bad spiritual being like Satan? Is the correct way to pray the Lord's Prayer, "Deliver us from evil," or should it be, "Deliver us from the evil one"? At stake in this question is the possibility that billions of Christians who pray the Lord's Prayer may in fact be saying it wrong. Most churches today say the prayer as "Deliver us from evil." But there are some very good translations of the Bible that translate this phrase in Matthew 6:13 as "Deliver us from the evil one." If these translations are correct, then many Christians are not praying the Lord's Prayer as Jesus taught it. It might seem like a minor issue, but today we'll see that the difference in meaning between these two options is actually very significant. I'm Dr. David Clark. I lecture in historical theology at the University of Roehampton in London, and the title of my podcast is Theology and Identity. In Season 2, we've been working our way through the Lord's Prayer to explore what it tells us about ourselves and what it tells us about God. This is our last episode on the Lord's Prayer because technically in the Gospels, this is where the Lord's Prayer ends. But let's get back to the question. Should we pray, "Deliver us from evil," thinking about evil as a disembodied power, or should we pray, "Deliver us from the evil one," thinking about evil as a person, namely Satan? Unfortunately, the grammar of the biblical text doesn't give us a clear picture. The phrase "deliver us from evil," found in Matthew 6:13, reads like this: "Alarusai hemas apo tu poneru," but deliver us from tu poneru. We want to know, does tu poneru mean evil in general, or does it mean the evil one? Grammatically, both options are possible. The phrase tu poneru can be translated in the neuter form as evil, or in the masculine form as the evil one. If we go with the neuter form, then again the translation is "deliver us from evil," and this is how it appears in translations like the King James Version or the ESV. In this case, evil refers to a general force or power, and the emphasis is on the impersonal or systemic nature of evil. If, however, we go with the masculine form, then the translation is, "Deliver us from the evil one," as we find in the NIV and the NRSV. Grammatically, there is no way to determine which one is right. So we've got to approach it from a different angle. I am going to argue that when Christians pray the Lord's Prayer, they should say, "Deliver us from the evil one." My rationale for taking this position is that this understanding is most consistent with the teachings of Jesus. Theologically, it's the most coherent option, and this is the understanding that best resonates with human experience. So these are the 3 points that we will look at today. First, I'm going to talk about why the personification of evil best resonates with human experience. Second, I'm going to explain why the deep personified understanding of evil from a theological perspective just doesn't work. And then finally, we're going to look at what Jesus himself had to say about the personification of evil. So we start with human experience. And here, I'm going to return to the metaphors of Star Wars and Dracula, and drawing from my own understanding of evil, I'll explain why I'm really afraid of one, but not so afraid of the other. Let's start with Star Wars. To establish my authority on this subject, I will note that I was there when it all began. The first Star Wars movie was released in 1977, just 2 weeks after my 9th birthday. And from the beginning, I was mesmerized. I'm not sure if kids still do this today, but in the 1970s, when we went to the movie theater, we wouldn't just watch a movie once. If it was a good film, we would usually watch it through twice. And if it happened that your mom forgot to pick you up, as once happened to me, you might be watching the same film the whole day. Anyway, at its first theatrical release, I remember being very proud of the fact that I had seen Star Wars 7 times. Now today, I actually have no idea how many times I've seen it. As much as I loved the first movie, and some of the episodes that have followed, I have to admit that this whole idea of the Force has always struck me as vague, a bit confusing, and not very compelling. Regarding the dark side of the Force, to be honest, I never found the whole thing all that scary. To help me with my confusion, I asked ChatGPT to explain to me what the dark side of the Force is all about. And this is the answer. The dark side of the Force in Star Wars represents the corrupting, destructive use of the Force driven by fear, anger, hatred, and the desire for power. The dark side is fueled by emotion and control. It tempts users with strength and dominance, but ultimately enslaves them. It's not just an individual choice, but a cosmic force that seduces and twists character, turning Jedi into Sith. The dark side symbolizes how giving in to inner darkness can lead to personal ruin and widespread suffering across the galaxy. Now, I don't know about you, but that just doesn't scare me. But just to check that I wasn't missing anything, I asked ChatGPT, "Is this scary?" And this was the answer. Yes, the dark side of the Force is meant to be scary, not just because of the villains who wield it, like Darth Vader or Palpatine, but because of what it represents. It's terrifying in a deeper psychological sense. It shows how anyone, even a hero like Anakin Skywalker, can be slowly corrupted by fear, anger, and the desire for control. It's seductive, offering power and clarity in chaos, but it comes at the cost of your identity, relationships, and soul. Now, I like the little disclaimer that ChatGPT gave here. It's meant to be scary. But the truth is, and apologies to George Lucas, it's just really not that scary. Was I ever kept awake at night agonizing over the way Anakin Skywalker was slowly being corrupted by fear, anger, and the desire for control? As a 9-year-old, was I terrified by the idea that I might be seduced by a power that would rob me of my identity and my relationships? I don't think so. And this leads me to a broader observation about the nature of evil. A depersonalized, disembodied expression of evil, while perhaps being intellectually appealing, does not weigh heavily on human consciousness. We're not afraid of abstract evil powers. We're afraid of evil people. And this leads me to the story of Dracula, which is an example of personified evil, and in my view, this is genuine terror. Now, as a kid, I actually had fun with the character of Dracula. My mom tells me that I would put on a black cape and form a little point with my bangs, put in my plastic fangs, and go up to people saying, "I want to bite your neck." But of course, this was all based on the mild, antiquated Bela Lugosi version of Dracula. As I got older and I reflected more seriously on the character of Dracula, the whole story filled me with dread. As darker and more serious interpretations of the story came out, I just stayed away. I couldn't watch them, and I can't watch them now. But the book is a different matter. Several years ago, I subscribed to a book club called Easton Press's 100 Greatest Books of All Time. Every month, a book would arrive at my door, and sure enough, one day the book that came was Bram Stoker's original novel, Dracula, originally published in 1897. Now, of course, that black leather book looked great on my bookshelf, but I didn't plan to actually read it. I might try to read the other 99 titles, but there was no way that I was going to touch Dracula. And so it sat on my shelf for probably 30 years. And then, just last year, I made a big decision. The time had finally come to read Dracula. I wish I could say that I just decided to stop being so childish, but the truth is, I was nervous about this. And as I set out on this task, I had to set some guidelines for myself. I wouldn't read it before going to bed. I would just read one chapter at a time. And if necessary, I would put on church choral music in the background. And I can say that in retrospect, I'm really glad I took these precautions. The book was totally consuming and absolutely terrifying. I didn't have nightmares, but I do remember waking up once in the middle of the night. In a half-dazed state of consciousness, I wondered if Dracula might be trying to get into my house. I then remembered that Dracula cannot pass through walls or windows, and as my windows were closed, I was okay, and I went back to sleep. I did finally finish the book, and I have to say that it is one of the best written books I've ever read. I loved the fact that so much of it happens in London and towns not far away from where I live. And I think I'll read it again. But before I do, I want to better understand why it's so stinking scary. As I think about it, it comes down to the fact that Dracula is a person. He's a really evil man. And that is something that does keep us awake at night. Even with my university-educated PhD mind, in my subconscious, I feared the possibility of having an encounter with him. Dracula doesn't just influence or tempt people. He comes to you in the night when you're asleep, when you're vulnerable. He comes to drink your blood again and again, and then over time you become like him. You join the company of the undead forever, and your own survival then depends on your success at preying upon other people. Dracula is a shapeshifter. He can become a wolf, a bat. You might think you found a way to protect yourself from him, but your defenses won't work. You might think that you found a way to destroy him, but he's always one step ahead of you. Count Dracula is evil in human form. He has a will, he has a plan, he has a strategy, and he's coming for you. This is the expression of evil that really scares us. This is what stirs up our fears in a way that Darth Vader and the dark side of the Force could never match. We're not afraid of evil force fields. we're afraid of evil beings. And this is one of the reasons why I think that evil, as it really exists in the world, is personified. Belief in the existence of malevolent evil spirits is one of the most commonly encountered elements of human culture. I did a bit of research on this and found that there is no known indigenous culture that entirely lacks some concept of malevolent or disruptive spiritual forces. So we have to ask ourselves the question, is the predominance of belief in personified evil just a product of the human imagination? Or might it be the case that humanity's predominant primal fear of evil beings somehow serves as evidence that these spirits are real? Personally, I don't believe that the universal fear of evil spirits and malevolent beings is simply a psychological construct. Rather, I believe that in this instance, our fears have an epistemic value. That is, our fear of evil spirits is a subconscious indicator of that which is real. This is a phenomenological understanding of religious experience, and it's not considered a fringe or wacko idea. Phenomenology validates the first-person religious experience as a legitimate source of knowledge, and that's the basis of my reasoning here. And that is the reason that I believe in personified rather than non-personified evil. The reality of evil beings resonates with the human experience. Phenomenologically speaking, our fear of evil beings points to the idea that they may actually be real. The second argument I'll present in support of personified evil is that the opposing arguments, theologically speaking, just don't seem to hold water. I just read a really interesting article by Father Louis Roy entitled Evil and the Demonic. Overall, this is a great article that seeks to define evil and explore how evil becomes manifest in human behavior. But one thing that Roy is very clear about is that he does not believe in the personification of evil as the devil or demons. Rather, he describes these characters as the objects of psychological projections. He argues that when confronted with the enormity of evil in the world, people find it necessary to project all this badness onto something or someone. He concludes that, quote, Satan language is a mythic personification of collective human evil, end quote. This is to say that humans invented characters like Satan and demons so as to give shape and form or personhood to something that they knew was real but couldn't explain. Roy believes that scientific knowledge has moved on from this kind of primitive thinking, but he still believes that evil is a real, actual category of human behavior. And so he asks the question, why can't we depersonify evil and at the same time continue to focus on its massive impact in the drama of the human race? And this is a really interesting question. What changes about our understanding of evil if we take away the idea of Satan and demons and evil spirits and just think about evil as the multidimensional activity of humans hurting other humans? Is the existence of Satan and the demons really necessary for the perpetuation of evil? Or would evil human behavior continue along just fine without them? My answer to the question is that the existence of Satan and the demons are in fact necessary to the human understanding of evil because these beings objectify evil as an external reality. Now let me unpack this. First, the existence of Satan and the demons demonstrates in a concrete way that evil choices disfigure and ruin the existence of spiritual persons that God created as good. Second, the existence of Satan and demons demonstrates that spiritual persons who have been overtaken by evil will become a malevolent influence in the world. Through them, evil will spread to others like a lethal virus. And finally, their existence is a concrete way to understand the origins of evil. In the biblical worldview, acting contrary to God's guidance for life and acting in a way that opposes his purposes in creation is the definition of evil. Satan and the demons did this, and through their actions, evil came into the universe. So in sum, the existence of Satan and the demons, 1, illuminates a concrete historical understanding of the origin of evil. 2, it illuminates the objective nature of evil as malevolence that seeks to dominate and destroy all life. And 3, it demonstrates the objective consequences of evil actions as disfigurement, distortion, separation, and death. When you take away Satan and the demons, you de-objectivize evil. You remove its status as an independent external reality. It no longer is an actual thing or being. It becomes something that exists only inside of us, as a subjective experience, perception, or social construction. Now for Roy, the essence of evil is that it's all about people hurting other people. But the question I have to ask is this: who gets to define that which constitutes hurtful behavior? Of course, we all agree that genocide and sexual violence are always wrong. They're evil. But in today's world, people are putting the label of harmful behavior on a lot of activities that may hurt other people's feelings, but which can dubiously be categorized as evil. Here are some examples to consider. Is cultural appropriation, like using the image of a Native American as a team mascot, evil? Is it evil to support the deportation of a person who has entered a country illegally? Is it evil if a person refuses to address another person by their preferred pronoun? Is it evil to give preference to an underrepresented minority when an employer is seeking to fill a job vacancy? How you answer any of these questions will be shaped by your own worldview and your own experiences. And in places like America, there will be a lot of disagreement over these issues. Whereas I'm not going to dive in on any of these questions, I hope I've made it clear that the character of evil is contested. It's subjective. It changes from person to person, generation to generation, and culture to culture. And for me, one of the reasons why this concept of evil has become so subjective is because evil has been depersonified. So going back to Roy's question, I would argue that the reason we can't depersonify evil is because when we take away the objective reality of evil beings, then the constitution of that which is evil in our world simply becomes a question of human experience and debate. And so to sum up my second point, from a theological perspective, the depersonification of evil inevitably leads to the de-objectivization of evil as an external reality. When you de-objectivize evil, then it becomes subjective. That is, when you take away the reality of Satan and demons, the whole notion of evil collapses into personal human interpretation. And so now we can move on to our third point, and that is, what did Jesus himself say about the personification of evil? When Jesus talked about evil, did he think of it as an impersonal dark force, or did he think of it as something that is personified? Looking at this question across the Gospels, it's clear that Jesus consistently accepts and assumes a worldview in which Satan is a real cosmic adversary with a kingdom opposed to God's reign. For Jesus, evil was personified in the person of Satan and his followers. As a result of their activities, evil has become pervasive in the world. His influence and power are evident not only in individual human behavior, but in the way that the systems and structures of the world operate. So let's look at some examples from the Gospels. In John 8:44, Jesus explains a bit of Satan's backstory. The text reads, "He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies." And what exactly does Satan do according to the Gospels? In all three synoptic Gospels, we find the account of Satan tempting Jesus in the wilderness. In the parable of the sower, Jesus describes Satan as the evil one who snatches the word from people's hearts and who sows weeds in the field of their relationship with God. When Jesus rebuked Peter for suggesting that he could avoid suffering, Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." When Judas betrayed Jesus, the Gospels say Satan entered into Judas. And when Jesus spoke to his disciples about the pending trials that they would face, he said, "Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat." What we see in all of these examples is that Jesus understood Satan as a real spiritual being who is actively at work to oppose the purposes of the Father in the world. And Jesus also believed that Satan had developed a universal structure through which evil was being perpetuated. And that's why in passages like John 12:31, Jesus refers to Satan as the ruler of this world. To sum it up, it would take a pretty creative interpretation of the Gospels to support an argument that Jesus didn't really believe in the reality of Satan and demons. If we believe that the Gospels are an accurate account of what Jesus really said and what he really did, then there's no way around the fact that he believed in evil as being personified in the person of Satan and the demons. So, we've covered our 3 points. We've talked about how the personification of evil resonates with the human experience. We've talked about the theological implications of depersonifying evil, and we've looked at what the Gospels have to say about the personification of evil. We are now ready to go back to the Lord's Prayer, and all of the evidence seems to point in the direction that we should pray this petition as, "Deliver us from the evil one," that is, Satan. Now, when Christians today pray it the other way, "Deliver us from evil," thinking of evil in a depersonified way, this isn't wrong or dangerous. Asking the Father to deliver us from evil in general can be construed as a request for strength to resist the evil influences of society and the world. For example, help me not to be influenced by all the hatred and selfishness that I see around me. Praying, "Deliver us from evil," can be construed as a request for strength to resist evil desires in the human heart. For example, help me not to be sexually lustful. And "deliver us from evil" can be construed as a request for protection from the harm and damage that is brought about by systemic evil. For example, save me from being the victim of government corruption. There's nothing wrong with this understanding of the Lord's Prayer. But in my analysis, all of these requests that I've mentioned above have already been covered at other places in this prayer. If you've followed me through this season of podcasts, then you know that strength to resist the evil influences of the world and strength to resist sinful desires of the human heart have already been covered in the petitions, "Hallowed be your name," and "Lead us not into temptation." Protection from harm and damage brought about by systemic evil in the world is already covered by "Let your kingdom come." Everything that many Christians think they're asking for in "Deliver us from evil" has already been touched upon in other petitions within the Lord's Prayer. The only thing that's really been missing in this prayer up until this point is mention of Satan. And that's why I believe that the intention of Jesus was for this petition to be understood as, deliver us from the evil one. That is, deliver us from the works of Satan and his demons. If you stick with what Jesus has had to say about Satan in the Gospels, this means, don't let Satan trick me into doing something that is contrary to the Father's will and ways. Don't let Satan snatch the word of God from my heart or plant weeds in the field of my love for God. Don't let Satan trick me into choosing the easy path when it's the hard path that I've been called to follow. Don't let Satan come into my heart and mind in such a way that I would betray Jesus. And don't let Satan sift me like wheat. And it can mean so much more. Now let me clarify that when we pray, deliver us from the evil one, we're not claiming that Satan is to be blamed for human sin. He's not a scapegoat. Sin in the teachings of Jesus is always a human choice. But Jesus does want his followers to be aware that Satan is a fallen being and that he and his demons are always trying to bring Christians down. Jesus therefore teaches his followers to pray for protection against the works of Satan every day of their lives. So let's sum everything up and bring this episode to a close. As the final installment in our study on the Lord's Prayer, we've been asking, how should the final petition be prayed? Is it deliver us from evil, or is it deliver us from the evil one? Looking at the Greek grammar, we've seen that both translations are possible, so we have to take a different approach. To find an answer to the question, we've been looking at the nature of evil itself. If we understand evil as a general force, a faceless, depersonified power like the dark side of the force, then the petition should be, deliver us from evil. If we believe that evil is personified in Satan and his demons, then the petition should be, deliver us from the evil one. In this episode, I have argued for the second option, and I've done so on the following grounds. First, the personification of evil resonates with human experience. Dracula is scary. Darth Vader is not. Second, I have argued that when evil is depersonified, it becomes de-objectivized. And if evil is de-objectivized, then it just becomes a subjective human construct. By maintaining the idea that evil is personified in Satan and his demons, the objective nature of evil is upheld. And finally, we've seen that there is an abundance of passages in the Gospels where Jesus sees Satan as the personification of evil. Since the work of Satan loomed so largely in the experience and teachings of Jesus, it just makes sense that Jesus would teach his followers to pray, deliver us from the evil one, meaning Satan. So, if you're among the billions of people in the world who still believe in the reality of Satan and demons, I hope this episode has helped you to see that you're not a backwards ignoramus. There is solid ground to stand on, phenomenologically, theologically, and biblically. If you are a follower of Jesus, as I am, then we need to understand that Jesus has shown us what it's like to walk in daily awareness of the works of the evil one. And he has commanded us to pray, deliver us from him. And with that, I will bring this episode to a close. This is the end of our discussion of the Lord's Prayer, and this is the end of Season 2. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to be back next year with Season 3. In the meantime, please reach out to me with comments or questions that you may have. Post comments in your platform. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to click on subscribe. And I hope that you will join me again.